Hey watch friends, today we're going to be taking a look at this upcoming offering from the micro brand Ikigai, and this is their Maru. This one will be coming to Kickstarter tentatively on October 18th of 2022. So first, for administrative matters, I do want to mention up front, this is a prototype that was loaned to the channel for review, so as always, if you see scratches, scuffs, etc. as we go through, it can be attributed to that. Additionally, if you saw the paid promotion banner up at the top, they do intend to send me a production model, so I want to be very transparent about that. Alright, so first, let's go ahead and take a look at the packaging. The watch is presented in just a basic cardboard black construction here that does have the company logo on the exterior. But as you open that up though, you start to see the cool stuff. First, for this warranty card. I don't recall readily seeing one of these. We've seen metal and some other stuff, but this is actually a wooden warranty card. As you can see with being the prototype, it doesn't have the information completed here, but it gives you an idea what it's going to look like, and that's, I think, a cool touch. As we set that aside, you can see it's in keeping with the inner actual watch box as well. The watch box is much smaller. I think it's actually nicely sized. There's my hand for reference. But it does have this kind of embossing into the top. You can see that's actually etched down in there in wood construction. As we open that up, it is hinged, no magnets or anything like that. And then you can see the watch is presented on this nice kind of almost like burlap kind of pillow in there. Nothing else comes inside there. And then you have the overall presentation, basic pillow, what you'd expect there. Now that we have a better feel for how the watch is going to be presented, I do want to mention and take a deeper dive into the overall specs. This is going to come with a 2-year warranty standard, so it's nice to see it's kicked up from the standard one. The case size is 40 millimeters, measured at roughly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position, and I measured that dead on. The bezel at the farthest protrusions, so here in this cog style, this comes out to about 41 millimeters, and you can see that just overhangs slightly, whereas it's dead on 40 millimeters on the inner portions. The lugs are going to be a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is a nice wrist versatile 46.3 millimeters. The total thickness is actually surprisingly slim, coming in only at 11.8 millimeters, and that's to the top of this flat sapphire crystal, which does include inner AR coating. The movement in this is one, if you know the channel, you know that I like. It's a Miyota 9039. So for those who aren't familiar, it's a nice high beat movement, decent power reserve, all those kind of things that you would want. It does have hacking, hand winding, etc. The 9039 versus 9015 just doesn't have a date here. As you can see, this one doesn't have a date anywhere on there. For the water resistance, you can see at the 6 o'clock position, it has 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance. As for the weight, sized to my 6.5-inch wrist on this bracelet, it's coming in at 158.1 grams. It's really not too bad, right in the middle weight area for that. And I will say, and kind of spoiler for this as we talk about the comfort, I found it to be nicely balanced and comfortable on wrist, but we'll talk about that further as we go throughout. So now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into the watch itself. First, for dial colors. There's of course the mint version that we're looking at today, which is a nice subtly greenish blue coloration. There's additionally going to be a red version, as well as a true blue version that's a nice deep kind of navy shade of blue. Each of these dials is going to have a consistent texture. It looks kind of matte in appearance, however I would describe it more as a satin, in that it does pick up an iridescence. In fact, actually picked up some noise, as you can see with the light play across the dial when we were doing these close-ups here, though stay tuned, we have better footage coming up as well. The dials do feature at the 12 o'clock as well as the 6 o'clock printing. At the 12 o'clock, you're going to have the logo, which as we'll see in the Lume footage, is loomed. At the 6 o'clock position, you're going to have the model name as well as the water resistance. That printing does carry over to the raised chapter ring, which it is a step type design. It is a true applied chapter ring. It has your individual minute and second hashes going around the perimeter, and unlike some, they do include the full 4 in between each of your markers, which is a nice touch there for visual symmetry as well as precision timekeeping. Shifting over to the hardware, the handset on this is what I would describe as kind of like a customized cathedral. It's reminiscent of a cathedral design for both the hour and minute hand. The second is going to be a true lollipop, and by true lollipop, I mean that if you look at the center, you can see that there is no counterbalance, so it is just that traditional lollipop configuration. The handset is all going to be a polished black, at least on this particular variation. Shifting over to the markers, as you can see, are nice. They're mainly rectangular, though they do have cuts on the inner perimeter. They have facets going around the edges, and they are highly polished. Those, unlike the handset, are not going to be that black coloration, so those get even a little more light play, but I will say they pick up a lot of shadowing, so it blends in nicely with the black of the hardware of the handset as well. So nice touches there. In the faceting, I always enjoy that as far as the light play aspect. Shifting over to the Lume on this is really one of the things that steals the show. So you're going to have Lume pretty much everywhere. As we already talked about, the 12 o'clock logo is going to be loomed. Of course, the markers. You actually have your chapter ring, the bezel itself, and then, spoiler, we're going to show you the case sides here in a moment. The case sides as well as the crown itself are going to be loomed. Just fantastic application there. I will say this is going to be punched up a lot. What I found to be kind of deficient on this prototype is the handset. The handset does fade a little quicker than the rest of them. However, spoiler here, the handset is going to be actually improved on the production version. They're actually making those larger, which will create more surface area and more application of Lume, so those will be in keeping with the rest. Similarly, the bezel, the Lume is going to be improved there as well, just because of the application that was an issue with the factory for the prototype. Shifting over to the case side, though, the case sides are impressive. These things, they have a geometric kind of grid pattern on both the 9 o'clock as well as the 3 o'clock side. And you can really see these just amp it up and take it to another level. Really cool touch there. Some people have expressed concern with the case side of being able to pick up dirt. I will say happily, throughout my wear, because it's kind of recessed in there, I haven't actually had any issues. So unless you're plunging your hand into dirt or otherwise, I don't think it's going to be a problem. Shifting over to the bezel, as you'd expect for a dive style orientation, is going to be unidirectional and is 120 clicks. As we already saw, this stainless steel bezel has kind of a cog pattern cut into that, so you can see wide sections of raised and recessed there. It's also going to have a stainless steel bezel insert. This unfortunately is not ceramic for that, and then it does, again, as we already saw, have a nice generous application of Lume applied. Checking out the action. This action, as you can hear, it's kind of on the soft side, it's a little bit tinny. I can't say it's the most satisfactory right now. Additionally, it does have a fair amount of play to it, and it's just not nearly as firm as I would like. And then finally, the bezel alignment is not perfect here either. You can see just a little bit of slop, hard to get that perfectly lined up. That being said, they are well aware of the issues on the prototype version, and they are already addressing that. They're going to stiffen the bezel. They're going to make the action more stiff. The actual locking is going to be more stiff as well. They're going to fine-tune that alignment. So everything should be improved on the actual production version, but the prototype's all I can go from for here, but I do want to share that feedback. Shifting back to the case, we've already looked at and talked about a little bit in the milling here. As you can see, it is a nice uniform grid, and this is going to be a traditional case float, but that really gives a unique appearance to this with that milling in there. I will say it is kind of a sharp milling, which is nice as far as it has precision lines, but you can actually feel that sharp edge on the interior, not the exterior, but on the interior when you drag your finger across that. We'll talk about that more in a moment. This really adds kind of a nice border accent. So not only does it help to keep clean on the inside of this from just not abrading on your hand or anything like that, and I have not found with my wrist that this has in any way rubbed. So as far as that sharpness, no functional issue there. It does have a nice flowing downturn to it, and I'm very happy to report that you can see the case back here. It's a nice shallow case back, so it doesn't have that flying saucer effect, and the downturned lugs do come right to the edge of that case back. So that's a nice flow there, and makes it good and wrist versatile as well. When you shift over to the aerial view, you can see the lugs do have a nice taper to them, so they come through a nice thin overall profile, which I think adds to the overall look and symmetry of this. At the 3 o'clock side, you can see there is no integrated crown guard. Speaking of the crown, this is coming in, it is a screw down construction, and it's coming in at 5.9 millimeters, so a little bit on the small side. But speaking of the crown, with it being screwed, this is the one area where I will say, and we'll talk about this further, the milling does come into play. It's a little bit hard because you have to kind of try to reach in there. So even though this has a nice knurling pattern to that actually I think matches nicely for the milling with the grid inlay. So I think that's a good style touch. And it actually provides plenty of grip, but with being a little smaller and kind of recessed in there, it is a bit tough to grab a hold of, especially when you get down to tightening that. So that is something, I don't know if I'd want to see it kicked out. Really, with being an automatic, you don't have to set it that much. It's not that big of a deal, but it is something I want everyone to be aware of. The actual crown itself is going to be signed, as we already saw in the Lume footage. That is both signed and loomed for that touch. Shifting over to the case back. The case back on this, as you'd expect for a dive style configuration, is going to be a screw-in case back. The predominant finish is going to be a polish, but it does have some nice like satiny blast through there, and it is pretty intricate as far as the boats and the waves and those kind of touches as you go through with your ship laid into the back. I will say personally, I'm not a huge fan of polished case backs, but I do think aesthetically it looks pretty nice. Shifting over to the bracelet on this is going to be an H-link construction. as you can see looking through here. It is going to be brushed for the overall finishing. It does have a female end link, and the bracelet is coming in at 20 millimeters, of course, at the lugs, and it does taper down at the clasp to 18 millimeters. So a nice soft taper as you go through, and I think that lends well to the balancing that we talked about earlier as well. As far as the construction, this is currently held in with pins. However, they are considering, so do add a comment down in the section below and let me know what you think. They are considering adding screws for this. So give them your feedback. They will be keeping an eye out. They personally like the pin style option because you don't ever have to worry about screw backing out, which, I can see the merit in that. Conversely, the screws, while they of course add a little bit of production cost, do present a headache. They're easier to change and you can Loctite them in to secure them, but they can back out on you. Additionally, the production version will add quick release spring bars on the back, so you will be able to change that out easily and take advantage of that standard 20 millimeter lug configuration. The clasp is a milled construction, so it has a nice milled bridge in there. It is a double pusher, and it is signed with a nice brush finish across there as well. On the perimeter, you do have 4 micro adjust holes, so you can get that fine-tuned to suit your wrist. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for the watch itself, let's go ahead and bring in a couple comparisons. The first I wanted to show, not only for the similar bezel type construction, this is a Zelos Swordfish 40, and you can see here, has a very similar pattern for that as far as the bezel shape. But additionally, I want to show, many of you are going to be familiar with this. It doesn't really render properly with the Zelos teal, but it gives you an idea here as far as the real world coloration if you have one of these in your collection and you want to see what that looks like. Similarly, I want to bring in a little more on the green side, and this is a Wise Hitman. This comes in at 41 millimeters, but as you can see, the actual overall presence I think is pretty similar between these. So this, I wouldn't say wears large for a 40 because it doesn't, but it does have a decent amount of presence, kind of like a 41 would, and this gives you an idea next to a fairly deep green there, so you can see it kind of walks the line between a blue and a green for coloration. Alright, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, some critiques, and there are some, as well as the overall summary. First, for the positives, gotta talk about that lume. The milling on the side, the lume application, I think it's really slick. It adds something that's a neat visual touch to it. Certainly it doesn't add a ton for functionality on the case lume, but with us lume junkies, that's something that we generally like, whether it makes sense or not. So that's something that I enjoy. The coloration on this particular one, I think it's a great color. That mint green, it's nice, it's fresh, it's bright, it's summery, it's spring, whenever you want it for warmer season, though, of course, you can warm yourself up in wintertime as well. I think that's a good color. I'm not as huge of a fan of the red and blue personally, but that just comes down to preferences there. I do like this mint a lot, though, which will be my pick for this one. As we already talked about, the balancing on this bracelet, I think it's nicely balanced. I do think it's comfortable. It hugs the wrist well. Overall, there's no real sharp lines or anything that give you any kind of hot spots, and I've enjoyed it. I found it to be well suited on wrist for that. The dial, you can see it's a nice, clean, not really a sterile type kind of dial configuration, but it is subtly done for it. Overall, you have excellent legibility. The contrast, especially on this lighter dial, the contrast of the black up against this mint dial, fantastic legibility. The hand length, I think, is nice, comes right out to the chapter ring there, so you can easily see precise time with that. Great. All right, the pricing. The pricing for this, I think, is pretty reasonable. It's coming in at $389 for super early bird pricing, for what you're getting with all the intricacies of this milling, with all the lume application, and this does have Swiss Superluminova all over it. You've got a lot in that alone, as well as the fact that it does have a nice Miyota movement, all those kind of things. I think it's fairly priced. So I don't think it's the steal of the century by any means, but I do certainly think that it's well within the ballpark of where I would expect this to be. Now that we have all of those positives, though, let's go ahead and talk about some of the critiques. We've already touched upon several of these. The sharp milling, this, as I said, functionally, it doesn't really have any issues here. I would like to see it broken or softened a little bit, especially if they can keep those tight mill lines while softening those edges. Really, it only functionally comes into play when you're manipulating the crown, and certainly it's not cutting up my finger or anything like that. But that being said, you do definitely feel it when you're getting into there, so that is something to note. The crown access, as we just kind of touched upon there, that can be a little bit tricky to grab a hold of. The bezel action, we've already touched upon that adequately. That's something they intend to improve on the production version. There it is again. Again, light, kind of tinny, a little bit of extra play there. So certainly something I want to see improved, but they're already working on that. The hand size, again, this is something I do think that this needs a broader handset. I do think the hands kind of wash out a little bit in the overall dial, which is having so much open real estate and blank space. I think that calls for a broader handset, which is exactly what they're planning to bring. They actually have two variations available. You've got an A and a B configuration, as you can see. They're very similar. Let me know in the comments which one you prefer. They just have a little bit of a different application of the arrows, but again, both of those are going to be larger, whichever style they go with. And then finally, the white text on this mint dial, as you can see at the 6 o'clock position, especially depending on the way the light's hitting it, it does kind of wash out. To me, it's not a bad thing at all. It's just something to be aware of. In case you want to reference the model name a lot, it can be a little bit hard to see. I don't have that issue with the chapter ring or anything like that because it has that nice perimeter as well as the black text. So functionally, no issue whatsoever, just something to be aware of. So where does that leave us overall? At the end of the day, as I already said, if you're a Lume junkie like me, this is something that's going to definitely have appeal to you. It's unlike anything else that I have in the collection. It really takes it up a notch. I think the generous application of Lume all over the place is, if nothing else, a cool wow factor and to kind of show off to your friends. And at a price point that doesn't break the bank, I definitely think if you're looking for an overall original design, or if you're just looking for something to kind of show off to your friends with some cool Lume, for under $400, I really don't think you can go wrong, and it's definitely worth a look. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy this, please do smash that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, please do smash that subscribe button. As we already talked about, drop some comments. Let me know what you think from the pieces that we talked about. Plus, it helps with the algorithm, so it's appreciated. Thanks, guys.